If you love growing vegetables yet you find yourself hiding them behind fences away from the prying eyes of polite society, I'm here to tell you that veggies can be beautiful. Perhaps you need to grow food incognito in your front yard, or you want to elevate the patch by your kitchen door, making it into a garden room. Whatever your goal is, I'll share with you 7 edible plants that double as ornamentals. We will rank each plant under 5 categories: ease of cultivation, visual impact, taste and nutrition, pest and disease resistance. In the double value category, is it really double duty? Let's see which vegetable takes the prize as the true, elegant, and edible herb. Our first contestant is the sweet pepper, the ají cachucha variety. While there are other ornamental peppers that are bred specifically to have fruit pointing up, I like this pepper because of its beautiful color and shape. I found this pepper to be especially easy to grow and trouble-free. Whenever I grow peppers, I make sure to use the plate germination method because of its advantages. Sometimes, depending on the variety, maybe how fresh the seed is and the temperatures of germination, your seeds are not going to sprout all at the same time. And that's why I actually advocate the plate germination method for these plants specifically, because that way you don't have space on trays that's not being used, and maybe even seed that's unviable, not growing. I place the germinated seeds onto soil blocks I created at home, and that way they can grow under lights until the weather is good outside to plant them. Transplant them outside when slightly temperatures rise above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, ideally. Even though we are going through a little bit of a cold snap in May, I decided to plant these 3 peppers here as canaries in a coal mine because while peppers can withstand just a little bit more cold weather than eggplants in terms of getting into shock, they will die if there's a frost. I am betting on the fact that this garden has a microclimate with southern exposure in the stone wall to reflect some heat so that if there is a near frost, it's not really going to affect them. Once summer hits, peppers just take care of themselves. Because it does take a bit of preparation to get it going, I'll award it 4 out of 5 leaves in this category. This pepper is especially good for the cutting garden. It creates these beautiful pendulous blooms full of clusters of fruit, and the color is really unsurpassed. I would award it 5 out of 5 in this category, but in a general garden, the fruits do hide a bit under the foliage, so I have to downgrade it to 3 out of 5. Peppers are high in vitamin C and other phytonutrients, and in terms of flavor, this pepper is especially aromatic. It's fruity and it's beautiful, tasty, delicious flavor. So I have to give it 5 out of 5 here for sure. In my experience, these plants are phenomenally pest resistant. I had trouble with other varieties with disease and some pests, but this one, not really. And there's no large herbivore that eats them. So you know what? I give them 5 out of 5 in this category easily. Now this pepper is clearly a great vegetable, but I think that the ornamental aspect is a bit secondary, especially if you're not considering it within flower arrangement. That's where they would shine. So within the general garden out there in the harsh sun without any special propping, they deserve 3 out of 5 unfortunately. Contestant number 2 is kale. Now you may be kind of surprised to have kale on this list. You might think about the ornamental cabbages that were commonplace in corporate landscaping in the early aughts, but I'm not talking about those. I'm talking specifically about red Russian kale. Kale, it just grows easily from seed. You just broadcast it in early spring, and next thing you know, you have mature plants that you can eat. Of all garden veggies, kale happens to be one of the most easy to germinate. It's right up there with radishes. It even self-seeds readily. So throwing seed and waiting for it is more than enough. You don't really need to raise them inside. Soon enough, as the weather agrees, you have beautiful plantlets. It's hard to believe that about 60 days exactly to the date is when I sowed this bed here, and just seeing the lush growth ever since, all the plants have thrived. If you broadcast them, you'll have plants that are just too close together, so you'll have to do what I call harvest thinning.
So my goal here is to see which plants are the strongest and leave those established and completely take out the smaller ones so that there's more space and there are more resources for the ones that have established stronger roots to succeed.
Giving kale plants a bit more elbow room will make them stouter and stronger. And if everything goes well, they'll grow all the way through winter. For that reason, I have to give it 5 out of 5 in this category. And red Russian kale is especially winter hardy, so it deserves bonus points, but I'll keep it at 5 out of 5. In its leaf form, kale is not anything really spectacular. You could hide it amongst the ornamentals, but you're really pushing it. Now, the stage that it really shows up and it has visual impact is when it flowers. That's in its second stage of life, second year. It's a biennial plant. And when it flowers, then you have a good display. It is around May of their second year that they flower. The red Russian kale produces a very airy and wispy inflorescence. The flowers do dance in wind, and even though they are small, they pack a punch with their color. That means that from afar, you can still see the flowering, even if it's a more gentle color. But above all, when they flower, they're a great nectar source for pollinators.
Well, it is rather unfortunate that I'll have to disturb the peace of these bumblebees here that are having their lunch on these kale blossoms. There is a sweet smelling scent surrounding this area, and that makes sense why they're so active at this point. But I do need to open up space to garden and plant other things that they'll enjoy also.
You can also eat the plant throughout all of its stages, as long as it's tender enough. The effect is great within a cottage garden because while they're beautiful, they're not perfect. They have a bit of the disheveled hair look, and that gives authenticity to the landscape. They give meadow vibes to any garden. But because it's kind of short-lived, the flowering stage, I'll give it 2 out of 5 in this category. Nutritionally, kale is a powerhouse, there's no denying that. Now, when it comes to taste, I personally love it, especially the red Russian kale. I think it's tender and sweeter. While we all know recipes that use kale leaves, I'll share with you what I do with the inflorescence. First, I get some garlic scapes.
It's gonna be a little bit annoying to take off all the tender parts, the tipmost flowers and the leaves, to make a really delicious, almost like a condiment to your sandwiches, cooked up kale in a pressure cooker.
I put all the tender leaves and flowers into the pressure cooker, then I roughly chop the garlic scapes with some spinach. About half a cup of tomato sauce, as well as some salt, is added. Just a little bit of extra water is enough. Finally, a drizzle of olive oil and you're ready to close the pressure cooker. Let it gain pressure and cook for about 5 minutes or so. You can use it as an extra condiment in whatever sandwich you want. I like to eat it with pan-fried tofu. It may not look the most appetizing, but I assure you, it's a flavor explosion. It's also a healthy way of eating your greens.
Let's see. This is probably the most delicious way of eating kale, bar none. I know that the amount of salt added and the acidity punch of the tomato makes it become something beautiful. It may not look the most appetizing, but trust me, if you have kale, especially I think red Russian kale that tends to be a little bit softer, this is the way to go.
Not everybody is a fan of kale in general, so for that reason I'll give it 3 out of 5 in this category. Oh, no denying kale gets low marks here. It is a magnet for pests. It just draws cabbage worms, and it's a favorite for larger herbivores like rabbits and especially groundhogs and deer. So definitely 1 out of 5 leaves. Now, don't get me wrong, kale is a great vegetable, but it's really only an incidental ornamental. So it's gonna get 2 out of 5 in this category, and I'm being generous. Our third contestant is carrots, and you know, this is a vegetable that everyone recognizes, children recognize it, but they may not know that it flowers. Carrots are a bit tricky to germinate reliably. I decided to test 2 methods that are supposed to get better carrot germination. First, I just direct sowed some seeds and covered them with grass clippings and also a board. This should keep a humid environment around them to promote growth. And that same day, I decided to test the gel germination method I've shared years ago on the channel. I put some carrot seed onto a mason jar, a little bit of water, swirl it around so the seeds go into the walls, and close the lid. If you decide to use this method, it's essential that you actually wait for the seeds to germinate. I've waited about 5 days, and the roots are just a little bit bigger than I would ideally like to see, because if your root starts to get long, they can get damaged in the process. You can now create the gel, about a spoon of cornstarch in 2 cups of water. Then I pour it into a bowl so that it cools. Once the mixture is close to room temperature, you can incorporate the seeds carefully using a spatula. You don't want to damage the roots. I funnel everything into a mustard bottle to make easy pouring. After creating a shallow trench, I squeeze the gel as a line. This should ensure more even and spaced out germination. The most important thing is to keep the soil covered, as in using grass clippings. That will ensure good germination anyways. After a couple of weeks, I could see that the ones that germinated under the board had several seedlings close to each other, whereas the gel germination provided for more spaced out seeds. That means if you don't want to go through the trouble of creating a gel, you can just dry seed it. You will have to thin it later though. They depend a lot on a good weather and good soil, so it varies a lot depending on where you grow them. They could be very easy or very hard to get to grow. So for that reason, because they're a bit finicky, I'll give them 2 out of 5 in this category. Well, you know, carrots are a root, so you can't see them. There's no visual impact there. And the foliage itself is nice and lacy, but I really chose them to be in this list because of the flower. When it flowers, it really dazzles. It looks a lot like its relative, the Queen Anne's lace, and it's perfect for any type of cottage garden or more informal garden. It really activates the space, but it also draws the attention of many beneficial insects. So for this reason, it's always good to allow a few of them to bolt and flower. So I'll give them 4 out of 5 in this category, without much hesitation, really. Undoubtedly, carrots are nutritious and delicious, and they deserve 5 out of 5 here. But if I'm treating them as ornamentals, I'm tempted to take away a point, because when carrots flower, that means that the root is already 1 year old, or is at least old enough for it to be woody and tough, so it's not going to be edible anymore. So if you're growing it as an ornamental, it's not going to be edible. Anyways, you can always leave a few to flower and eat the rest. Carrots do have some issues with pests. Depending on where you live, there are specific pests that attack them, and you can have misshapen roots, and it can be a problem. They also attract the attention of rabbits, obviously, and groundhogs and other herbivores, so I have to give them 3 out of 5. Well, when you harvest carrots to eat, then you're not going to get the flower, and if you allow them to flower, you're not going to be able to eat it. So is it really a double duty? Not really. For that reason, I'm going to give it 2 out of 5. Cardoon is the 4th contestant. This perennial plant is actually the relative of a thistle or a well-known artichoke, but they are hardier because they're perennial also, and you can grow them in more places. While cardoon have robust seeds that could probably be direct sown, I like the control you get by using the plate germination method. Once I sprout them in a controlled environment, I can place each seed onto a soil block so that it gets ready to be planted outside. I have to say that growing in soil blocks is perfect. The root systems look absolutely phenomenal. They're just starting to peek out. This method produces no waste, and it also means that the plant will experience less shock, and it won't have root-bound roots either.
I simply dig holes to accommodate the root ball, place the plant, cover the soil with grass mulch, and soon enough, they're growing beautiful and big.
There just comes a time in a plant's life when they really get a boost of energy. I think it's after they really develop their root structure so that they can now put all their emphasis in growing leaves. It's looking already majestic. I can only imagine how big this is gonna get. It's gonna really fill up the space. As soon as you get cardoon seeds to sprout, because sometimes they need a bit of cold treatment to germinate reliably, after that they grow like weeds and they continue growing. They come back year after year. For that reason, I would give cardoons 5 out of 5. But if you're growing them not only as an ornamental, but as a vegetable, then there's this whole complicated step of trying to mound earth, to blanch them, to get the stems to be more edible towards the end of the season. That's a little bit more complicated. The whole plant is just botanical architecture. It's beautiful. The color, the gray-green leaves, they interplay well with all the other shades of green in your garden. They have beautiful structures that remind us of the acanthus leaf, of classical motifs. They have the spiky, odd buds, and then they open up to beautiful purple flowers that bees just love. So all in all, visual impact, 5 out of 5 without a question. I would almost just class them and just grow them as ornamentals. You do have to be careful because they can be a bit invasive with their seeds. If you cut the seeds early before they set and dispose of them correctly, then it shouldn't spread. And I do use a thornless variety that's much easier to work with. Just like artichokes, cardoon may promote liver health. While I tried to eat the stems in summer, they turned out to be too bitter. But the flowers gave me hope.
This does have a wonderful scent. I bet it's very, very bitter at this point. And even after cooking, it might be too bitter without blanching. But the fragrance, it does smell like, well, grass, but not in the grassy sense. It's really hard to say. But at the same time, it has a delicious food-grade perfume.
They are rather small, so eating them can be a bit finicky. Yet, since I cannot grow artichokes reliably here in Maryland, this is a great alternative.
And that's sweet. Delicious. Just like artichoke.
Now, the taste, it can be quite bitter, intensely bitter, especially if you don't do the blanching complicated stage. Because of that, and because you could eat the flowers like artichokes and they're sweeter, but they're smaller, so for that reason, I'll give it 3 out of 5 here. I found no major pests and disease attacking this plant, and even groundhogs didn't want to eat it, probably because of the bitter taste, so it's 5 out of 5. Oh, it's definitely 5 out of 5. It's a double duty plant. You could plant it, you could eat it, and you can enjoy it as an ornamental. It's going to come back. If you learn how to blanch it, you'll have the delicious cardoon stems that you can use in stews, etc. Cardinal basil is the 5th contestant. While I could just do basil in general, I want to be specific about this variety because I think this is the best of both worlds. In warm and humid places, basil just grows like a weed.
The plate germination method works beautifully with basil. However, I tried to grow it directly on the soil blocks, and that turned out to be okay as well.
Instead of using the plate germination method, I wanted to try something else to see if it was as effective, and I planted them in the soil blocks with the sheet of glass on top, waiting for them to germinate. I only scattered the seeds over the surface of the soil because basil does like or need light to germinate. I did put this tray out one day to harden off other seedlings, and it was a slightly colder day, maybe 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and perhaps that's when the basil did not like it. And you can see that their cotyledons here have discolored. I don't know if that was shock from cold. In any case, now the true leaves are looking nice and vigorous, so I need to transplant them.
Basil always does best when it's transplanted out as a bigger, stouter plant. It will be less prone to attacks from slugs and such things. So transplanting them and waiting for the temperature to rise is essential.
It can be a bit tricky sometimes in the seedling stage, getting it to germinate and survive for the first few weeks, but after that it's pretty easy if you have the right climate. So 4 out of 5 here. Usually you don't want basil to flower, but for cardinal basil you do. Once it flowers, it creates these compact clusters of reddish flowers that look much more ornamental than any other basil variety. You almost mistake it for just a flower, and this is a true stealth vegetable for finicky neighborhoods, if you know what I mean. And it flowers for a long period of time, all the way up into frost, and it doesn't get gangly like other basils do. For this reason, I have to give them 5 out of 5 easily. I would even give it 6 out of 5 if I could, but thinking better, I can. So yeah, 6 out of 5 in this category. That's it. No more questions asked. When it comes to taste, this basil packs a punch. Its aroma is delicious and the taste is also phenomenal. It can be a bit too strong perhaps for pesto compared to sweet basil, so I'll give it 4 out of 5 in this category. Nothing really seems to touch this basil once it's established outside in the hot, humid weather of summer, especially in Maryland. So no animal wants to eat it, and for that reason, I would give it 5 out of 5. However, sometimes it can be a bit tricky when you're growing it indoors for the first weeks to be able to prolong your season and have it earlier, and they get fungal diseases just like any other basil.
I've had a rather disheartening discovery today regarding the basil. It just appears that they have some type of bacterial or fungal disease. They were growing beautifully indoors under grow lights. The soil is wet here, but the plant is starting to wilt. That's a sure sign of disease.
So I'll give it 4 out of 5 in that category. This variety of basil is the epitome of double duty. The other ones can try, but you know what? This one gets 5 out of 5 for sure. Black Salsify is the 6th contestant. This plant is just amazing. I've shown it before in the channel, and I've shown the other one, the purple flowered annual type, but I think this one is more versatile.
This plant can become a weed and readily self-sows, so getting it to grow is simply throwing the seed directly where you want them to grow. Once they sprout, they look like blades of grass, just a little bit thicker. That's when you can thin them down if you want sparser plants and more productive plants. After some months, the vegetation grows and it's ready to be harvested. But you can also wait longer. This plant can be harvested every year, and it's a perennial. It doesn't get tough.
Salsify is just straightforward. You plant the seed, you wait, it grows, then you harvest the root if you want to. Next year you have flowers. That's it. 5 out of 5 for sure. This perennial black salsify, which is different from the purple flowered biennial type, it has yellow flowers, which are not as beautiful perhaps as the purple ones, and they are in these more wiry clusters, which I think is good for a cottage garden. The flowers themselves remind us a lot of dandelions, so they might not be as elegant for everyone. They're a bit better than dandelion. They're more sparse and more beautiful, and they gently wave in the breeze. For that reason, I'll give it 3 out of 5 in this category. But the yellow in the flowers is strong, but not quite as offensive as marigold yellow. Salsify has a delicate and delicious taste. It's more of a novelty vegetable than a mainstay, and I think the perennial one is much better. You can harvest it year after year, and the roots don't get tough like the biennial one when it flowers. So I'll give it 4 out of 5 here. This plant has been very reliable for me, coming back year after year, and nothing really touches it, except for groundhogs. They do love the foliage, so if I protect it, it's fine. And for that reason, I'll give it 4 out of 5. Unlike carrots, black salsify is still edible after it flowers, so I consider that a true double duty plant. If you do harvest the root to eat, then you don't have a plant anymore. You have to plant more. So for that reason, I'll give it 4 out of 5. Our 7th and final contestant is none other than the Jerusalem artichoke, which is actually a native plant in the Americas, but do beware when you plant it because it is a bit aggressive. It couldn't really be easier to grow. You just get the tubers, plant them, wait, plant grows, then you harvest it at the end of the season. That's it, 5 out of 5. Through most of its life, Jerusalem artichokes just have tall, cane-like foliage. So it can be useful to create instant hedges, but it's not particularly beautiful. It's when they flower late in the season, that's when they show their true colors. And they have graceful, daisy-like flowers, not garish at all, that kind of dance in the wind. So I would have to say that they deserve at least 3 out of 5, only because they only flower late in the year, and before that, they can be a bit of an eyesore depending on your style of gardening. Unless you use them in the back, then they could be very useful. The tubers have a pleasant enough taste, but the texture is a bit watery, and not everybody likes them. And they also cause gas to be produced because they're rich in inulin, which actually is a good thing for people with diabetes since it doesn't cause insulin spikes. I'll give it 3 out of 5. I haven't grown Jerusalem artichoke for a while, but when I did, I didn't have any problems with pest and disease, so I'll give it 5 out of 5. The plant is clearly an edible, and it's sort of an incidental ornamental, so I'll give it 2 out of 5. So who's the winner? Who's the true double duty vegetable? Let's tabulate the results. And in third place, we have the pretty and practical ahi peppers. In second place, we have the sassy and succulent salsify. And in first place, it's actually a tie between the classy cardoon and the beautiful basil. I hope you enjoyed the format of this video, that it gave you ideas on what plants to include in your cottage garden and your kitchen garden. And if you want to see more category videos about flowers in a cottage garden, perhaps perennial, vines, or other types, bulbs maybe, I don't know, leave a comment down below and I'll make sure to make more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. Those who have bought art through my Etsy shop, or those who have supported through Patreon, you make the videos possible. Thank you so much, and see you next time.